We've learned a lot about 401ks, but 401ks aren't going to apply to everyone in this class. And my guess is most of you in this class will at some point deal with some of these alternative plans that I'm going to discuss in this video today. So if you recall, 401ks, these are for private for-profit businesses in most cases, okay? So if you're offered a 401k, you're probably working for a company that's trying to make profits. If you work for a nonprofit or governmental entity, you're probably not going to be given a 401k. You're going to get some other options instead. So we're going to talk about some of those options here. And, I want to make sure that we understand, 401ks are something you hear a lot about. And they are common, but part of the reason you hear about 401ks is because 401ks are a very streamlined thing. If you work for a private entity, you're going to be offered a 401k. But if you work for some other entity, you have different possible options of what you'll receive. So a lot of people know about 401ks because they're so prevalent. If the government were to streamline everything else and do just one other plan, this other plan would be very well known. Instead, it's much more nuanced. There may be multiple plans that you have available if you work for a government entity. And so, a lot of people work for these organizations. You're probably going to deal with some of these plans in the future. So in no particular order here, we're going to talk about 3 other types of plans you might receive. Firstly, I'm going to mention the 401a, probably the least important of these 3 that I'm going to discuss. If you happen to work for the state of Georgia, the 401a is likely a plan you're going to receive. A 401a is similar to a 401k in some respects, but it is the most different of the ones we're going to discuss today. Usually this plan basically forces a certain amount to be saved, if you will. In regards to 401ks, it's rare for your business to say you have to contribute. But a 401a will not only force you to put money into it, but it'll also tell you exactly how much you're going to have to put into it. So usually it's based on a percent of your income. Another unique feature of the 401a is the employer match is mandatory. It's actually part of the law that if you're going to open up a 401a, the entity, whether it's a government or nonprofit, has to contribute. Okay, so this is about your employer creating a retirement plan that they really control. So there will definitely be employer contributions if you're lucky enough to have one of these plans. All right. Also, a lot of the other rules with the 401k don't apply. That $19,500 maximum doesn't apply to the 401a. It's different, okay? But what makes it similar to the 401k is that you're still going to be choosing what index funds or mutual funds are included. You still have to wait until you're 59 and a half to receive money for it. So there are similarities and there are differences. And frankly, there's not much of a reason to learn about the 401a. There's not much reason to dive way down in the weeds and learn all the details about the 401a because you don't have any flexibility here. It forces a certain amount to be saved, and it's based on a percentage of your income. So you don't get to choose if you're going to put more or less in. So this may be a big deal to you, but there's not much you can do that's actionable about it. There's not much you can do to change about your plan. Let me give you a specific example of a 401a, and this is actually the University System of Georgia provides this 401a. When you become an employee of Georgia, they give you 2 options. You can go on this 401a plan, or you can go with a pension plan. I chose the latter. I'm on the pension. But if you go with the 401a, this is how it works. So for the University System of Georgia, you will have a 6% mandatory contribution. And your employer, in this case, the state of Georgia, will make a 9.24% contribution. That's a big contribution. We were talking about those 401ks and saying, 4.5% contribution is good. 9.24% contribution. If you've ever wondered why people want to work for the government, the benefits are generally still much better. Historically, decades ago, people used to talk about how government gave such good benefits, such good insurance and retirement plans. In regards to the retirement plans, a lot of the benefits are still really, really good. So if you have this system here and your income is $100,000, what that means is you will be forced to make a $6,000 contribution every year, which will be pulled gradually from your paycheck incrementally, and you will receive $9,240 in employer contributions. So $6,000 comes out of your income pre-tax. This is like a traditional account, okay? $6,000 goes in. Also, your employer puts in $9,240. So there we go. You've got $15,240 automatically invested in your 401a. What a tremendous plan. For a lot of people at Georgia College, they don't have to worry so much about their other retirement plans, because if they're on this system, that may be enough to basically push them forward to retirement if they're working the traditional 35 or 40 years. So that's a 401a. Just a couple of other really quick notes about the 401a. 401a is always traditional. There is no such thing as a Roth 401a. That's just not the way it's set up, at least not to my knowledge. I've never heard of one. So it's always going to be traditional, which means that when you put the money in, it's not taxed, but when you withdraw in retirement, then it would be taxed. It's still got the same rules in regards to 59 and a half being the age that you can withdraw from this plan. And this is going to be true for all of these that we talk about today. You got to be very careful about fees. I'm just going to write that up here. Be careful about fees, because these governmental entities often don't do a very good job of fighting for good index funds and mutual funds. A lot of times, state governments basically contract out the work for these accounts, and they'll contract out with a company like VALIC, for example, and VALIC will choose to have very bad rates, and in turn, they won't have much competition either. So sometimes these nonprofits, these government entities, they'll have just one vendor like VALIC, and VALIC basically has a monopoly and can charge very high expense ratios on their funds. Luckily at Georgia College, we don't have that problem. We actually have really good plans. But you definitely want to look in and see what those fees are. Be very careful about what you're investing in. So that's a 401a. Other types of plans, right? So you got one, the 401a. We know how that works. Kind of different from a 401k. The next is the 403b, and this is very similar to a 401k. All right, 403b, very similar to a 401k. If you happen to end up being a public school teacher, you're almost certainly going to have a 403b offered to you. And if you work for a state government, good chance you have one of these available to you. But for whatever reason, the education system seems to have this most frequently. I have a 403b. I have at least the opportunity to invest in a 403b. It's something offered to me as an employee of Georgia College, and that's one thing that's unique about these plans. If you have a 401k, that's usually all you have. But if you're a nonprofit or governmental worker, you often have all three of these plans simultaneously, which means you could contribute a ton to these tax advantage accounts and significantly reduce your taxable income today if you wanted to. So the 403b, very similar to a 401k. Maybe the only big difference is there's very rarely a match. Has to do with the way the tax laws are built. These entities that issue 403bs usually are incentivized to not offer a match on their 403b, which is part of the reason why they opt for the 401a in some cases. But it still gives you the same tax benefits as an unmatched 401k. You can still go traditional or Roth, like a 401k. Money still has to be there until 59 and a half. There's still penalties for withdrawing it. So basically, this is what all you really need to know. The 403b is just like the 401k, except there's not going to be a match, all right? So this is like the public world's, right, nonprofit world's 401k. So not a lot of new material to learn there, which is always good. And the third and final one is the one that I care the most about. This is my favorite plan of all these that we've talked about, the 457B. All right, so we got 401k, 401A, 403B, and 457B. If you wondered where these names come from, it's just where they're listed in the tax code. You know, big book with a bunch of information. This is where they're listed in the tax codes, okay? There are things like 457As and 403As, but they're just not so relevant, so we're not talking about them today. 457B, if you have any inkling of retiring early, you're going to love this 457B. Again, this is very similar to the 401k or the 403b, but it has one, or really two, very crucial differences. Okay, so you can still go traditional or Roth. You still take the money that's in there and invest it in various index funds, mutual funds. All of that's really the same, but there's two big rule differences. All right, the first is that you can withdraw these funds after separation of employment for any reason. So if I were to quit my job right now, I actually do have a 457B plan with a lot of money in it. So if I were to quit my job today, tomorrow, I could take all of the money out of my 457B if I wanted to. Now, I would pay taxes on it, but I wouldn't pay any fees or anything. So it makes this account really flexible, especially if you want to retire early. If I decide I want to retire when I'm 45, I could then withdraw money from my 457B to live off of. That is not an option with the 401k, 401A, or 403B because all of those plans require you to wait until you're 59 and a half to withdraw penalty free. So if you have any desire to retire early, this is a good plan. And I think I mentioned before, I'm sort of thinking 51 is a retirement age for me. And I may keep working some after I turn 51 and retire, but I won't be making a lot of money. And so I'm going to depend on my 457B to serve as my to cover my living expenses after I hit that threshold. So that's one big benefit. I mean, if that was the only difference between these two, the 457B would always be better. But there is a small cost to having the 457B. Otherwise, if you're not retired, you must wait until 65 to withdraw. So if I decide, I have a change of heart in regards to what I'm going to do in the future, and I decide, I just love working at Georgia College too much, I'm going to stay here until I'm 70. Well, I would not be able to withdraw from my 457B until I turn 65. Remember, with the other plans, it's 59 and a half. To me, I don't really see this as a big problem because if I'm working up until I'm 65 anyway, I'm already earning income. I probably don't need the 457B to pull from at that point. So to me, the 457B is like the best of all of these plans because of that early withdrawal ability. I mean, let's say I get fired. Let's say something bad happens and I get fired, right? Well, I'm not earning any money, but I can start withdrawing from my 457B if I want to. With the other plans, probably you won't have that benefit. So this is really nice. So, you can kind of think of it this way. If I'm looking forward into the future, I want to be optimistic about my salary. I'm going to say my salary is $150 as I approach my retirement age. And this is kind of what it's going to look like for me. My income is going to drop off, right? I'm going to go from making $150 a year to suddenly zero when I hit 52. If I was using just a 401A or just a 403B, this is not a very good way to set up my taxes. I hope you guys recognize why this is a bad system, all right? In order to fund these years down here, the period between when I get done working and my Social Security kicks in order to fund those years, I will need to have saved money from these years, all right? So I will need to put these monies into like taxable accounts, right? I can't put them in a 401k or a 403B because I won't be able to access them when I need them. But through the 457B, I can basically just take some money from each year and press it forward into the future, all right? Remember, I don't generally like I don't like having high taxable incomes Because if you have a high taxable income, what that means is you're basically forced to pay taxes at a high effective tax rate, right? So if I was to fully earn all of this money, I'm going to end up facing a really high tax burden. But what I can do instead is contribute to the 457B, reduce my taxable income now when my tax rate is high, and then withdraw that money when I'm retired, when I'm earning no money and my tax burden will be very low. So if I start withdrawing from my 457B here, I'm going to be paying a 10% tax rate. Versus if I'm earning the money here and having to hold on to it, I'm going to face like a 24% tax rate. So I basically want to smooth out my income so that over time I earn about the same amount every year, even during those years when I'm not working. The 457B gives you that ability, okay? If you're interested in retiring early, by the way, you might look into something called FIRE. This is an acronym that stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. This is something that's gotten much more popular in recent years. There's lots of people out there that are retiring in their 30s and 40s, and it's really not that hard to do. Retiring in your 30s is pretty tough. Retiring in your 40s is really not that hard to do. You just have to be willing to, save a tremendous amount of your money. Not everybody wants to do that. But if you're thinking, I'd like to retire at 51 like me, which is, not that crazy, you're going to want to really be strategic in using these accounts. So anytime you do something that's sort of outside of the norm, that's when you really have to be strategic because you're going to have to basically guide your own mission. The way our system is set up is for you to work until you're like 65 and then start taking Social Security. If you do that, the system is kind of built for you already. It's already the taxes are already built fairly well for your plan. But if you do something abnormal, like work until you're 80 or work until you're just 45, then it becomes more advantageous to really play around with these figures and figure out how it all works. So for me, since I'm thinking I'm going to retire early, maybe not super early, but earlier than 65, this 457B plan is really important to me.